Aloha and welcome to Your Heart Magic, an illuminating space where psychology, spirituality and heart wisdom meet. Here's your host, Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, the clinical psychologist with a mystic mind.
Aloha, everyone. This is Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright, and welcome to Your Heart Magic. Today, we are talking about things your heart wants you to know, understanding how your heart is speaking to you. And I am so excited about this podcast episode. I know I say that about every single one. I probably always will. I'm probably not going to make the podcast if I'm not excited. But this is Your Heart Magic. This is what I decided to call this podcast. And so we're talking about the heart today. I love this topic. It's been a life-changing, revolutionary topic for me to truly begin a journey of understanding how my heart is speaking to me, how I can be in relationship with my heart and understand its wisdom, and how I can learn to lead with more love and live my life in a heart-based way while still working with my intellect and my instincts and my intuition. This is like BethAnne's game changer. So I'm really excited to share the information that has come through for today's podcast. And I really did open up to multiple channels of information today in order to bring this information through. Some of what I'm sharing is just based on my own experience, things that I've read, things that I've picked up along the way, things that I've learned that I have found to be true about living with the intention of our heart and living through our heart. Some of this is from the Akashic Records. And I actually opened the Akashic Records on this topic, things your heart wants you to know, understanding how the heart speaks, I think is how I termed it when I opened the records. And then some of this was from me putting my hand on my heart and saying, what am I meant to share today? And also writing down the things that came through and wrapping them up in this nice little package of this podcast. So let's dive in with that. I'm so glad everyone is here, and welcome to our new listeners. It's really lovely to have you if you're joining us for the first time. Right now, this world has been going through what I would call like a mass opening of our heart chakra. And a few episodes ago, I believe it was episode 2, where we talked about navigating spiritual awakenings, I made the statement of how the world had been going through this mass spiritual awakening over the past few years, specifically around the time of the pandemic. Though it started before that for a lot of people, but I feel like the pandemic is probably one of those historic things that all of us, if we were to draw out a personal timeline, like that would go somehow on our personal and collective timeline where we would say, that was a thing. And all of our lives changed around the time the coronavirus became a thing, and our world started going through this, kind of mass changes with that. And most people that I talk to have some sort of story of how their life changed at the time. And for many people, life slowed down. They had a lot more reflection. Some people lost work. Some people got to step back from work and receive some form of pay or compensation at the time because of some of the benefits coming through. Some people were starting one thing and had to completely pivot and go a different direction entirely. I am one of those people. I had just started really grounding my career as a speaker and had what I considered a very successful speaking event in February of 2020. I was so excited. I really received this big vision of how I was going to build this kind of fun pathway to getting my voice out there. Interestingly enough, that big vision and all of that happened around the time of the Leo full moon in February of that year. And Leo is all about the heart. That was a big heart opening moon. And then boom, March comes along and all of a sudden we're quarantined and I'm not going to be flying or traveling anywhere to speak for a long time. And for me, that's when this great pivot began for me. And so a lot of people have a lot of stories about that. And on a more serious note, A lot of people have a lot of grief from that time. There was a lot of loss. There was loss of loved ones. There was loss of life. There was loss of job. There's a lot of changes happening. And so for many of us, that is just a point that many of us could agree upon. I would say the bulk of people that we would put it down on a map and say, yes, our world changed at this time. So it's an easy point in time if we need to trace it back to when did this big shift begin, to say, the shift had already begun, but our awareness of it really started to come into consciousness at that time. And this mass spiritual awakening started to happen because there was a lot of space created during that time. And in that space, in that disruption of daily life and our daily stream of consciousness, we had new space to evaluate and to assess and to think questions about, am I going where I want to go in life? Am I living where I want to live? Is staying in this career serving me? When we have space, we have to slow down, and we are forced to do a self-inventory process. We can try and avoid that and distract, but most of us who would be listening to this podcast are individuals who are probably showing up for yourself and doing your inner work. And so you went inward at that time. We all did. And think about what happens when you have the majority of the population forced to go inwards and forced to evaluate. People need to go into their heart in order to do those things. Even if we are making a decision about something like, is this the right job for me? And we're, doing a pro and con list. Somebody might say something like, well, what do you really want to do? Like, what's in your heart to do? If you could create anything you wanted, like what lights you up? What excites you? What are you passionate about? Passion is connected to the heart. Those questions are heart-based questions. They're not necessarily intellectually, what's the most practical thing to do that's going to come with great benefits, a great salary, and a really good retirement package. Those are questions that have to do with our identity and our sense of why am I here and our sense of purpose and a lot of the heart-based topics we've been discussing on this podcast. And so we really have to connect with the intelligence of our heart to find the answers to those questions. And we talked before about this quote that I said was by the poet Rilke last time about like being patient with the unanswered questions in your heart. And it's through living the questions that we find our answers. It's not through thinking them through. Thinking is part of the process, but feeling them and being in the heart, that's the whole package. And so our world began a shift at that time into a great, what I feel like has been this big opening of, I guess that's the fourth chakra, if we want to put it into chakra words, and an opening of our heart chakras. And that's continuing right now. You don't just like open your heart chakra once and all of a sudden, like, that's it, you're forever open. Just like spiritual awakenings can happen multiple times, or we can go through different degrees of an awakening. Our heart goes through these expansions and contractions, particularly if we've had grief or heartache or something that was painful that kind of made us pull into ourselves. And so when we are living with our heart and we are working with our heart chakra and we are doing our best to stay open, there's times that we close. And I feel like we close so that when we reopen, we bloom even more beautiful than before. So this beautiful sort of expansion, contraction, expand some more, contract a little bit, expand some more. This has been going on in multiple hearts on the planet, all beliefs, all walks of life, all different locations, actually since human history, but specifically my spiritual sense is it has been extra amplified and a shift in heart-based consciousness over the past few years. So this is a great topic for us to talk about because we are being very relevant and very modern day and asking these questions. Following our heart and listening to our heart is not some kind of out there concept, people have got these terminologies that they like to use, like woo or airy fairy or hippy dippy trippy or things like that. These funny labels that I guess are supposed to describe stuff that seems out there. And I'm like, no, this is actually like right here in the here and now. This is not something out there. And if you're like a fairy believer, that's cool. We can be airy fairy and practical and modern and make these things applicable to living and applying in our day-to-day life. So here we are going through this awakening of heart-based consciousness together. This is going to be experience for us in different ways, and we all figure out how to navigate us as best as we know how. And something that's really cool about the heart is there's been a lot of talk about it in recent years. And when I began my own journey of really working with the heart, it didn't come at all from a scientific place. It didn't come from a place of reading something and thinking, oh, I want to be more heart-based. I've shared my story on here in little bits and pieces, and it basically came from going through a very painful divorce and subsequent spiritual awakening back in 2011, and really listening to my heart and connecting to this intelligence inside of me. And I knew there was something very real about it at the time because I changed so dramatically. My life changed so dramatically. How I looked at the world changed dramatically. My spiritual gifts opened in abundance, and everything was so different. Like this light had come in, and I was living in this joy and living in this light and living in this new space of awareness. And so just from my intuition, I knew there was something there that had to do with living by the heart. And you don't really have to explain this concept to people. If you say to somebody, what does your heart say? Often they'll surprise you. I remember once I was getting like an Uber ride or something from some van driver when I was at a conference in California, and they were driving me back to the airport, and he asked me what I'd been speaking on. And it was about like awakened hearts and like the consciousness of the heart. And somebody very different than me. I don't remember anything about him, except this is probably not somebody that I would ever go sit and see like in a meditation circle, probably not going to be at a full moon ceremony, probably won't be listening to this podcast. And he said to me very seriously, yes, but like, how do I learn to listen to my heart? How do I learn to like get into my heart? And he was very sincere. And he went on to tell me some stuff happening with a family member, and that he had this pain in his heart and that he didn't know how to listen to his heart. So we had this very just normal day-to-day conversation. I didn't need to scientifically prove to him that heart intelligence exists. He already knew the truth, because he was just listening to himself. So we innately know the truth of this already. But if you're somebody who loves knowledge and you want to know a little bit more about it, many people have already heard of HeartMath.org. I'll put the link down in my resources. And they started doing all this wonderful research years ago where they really talked about how the electromagnetic field of the heart is it's like 3 times stronger. It might be more than that. Like 98% stronger or something like that than the brain. Apologize for not having my numbers exactly right. But, in essence, to sum it up, it's stronger than the mind. And so they really started examining this idea that like our heart is this more intelligent organ. It has an intelligence all of its own. It is stronger than the mind. And I think I ran across HeartMath. If I hadn't found them online, I remember I was reading the book, Living in a Mindful Universe by Eben Alexander, MD, who wrote a couple great books. Last I read his work on having this, amazing experience, near-death experience, and it really changed him as a neurosurgeon and a doctor. And he went on to want to learn more about spirituality and intelligence. And he mentions heart intelligence and HeartMath in his book. And I remember stumbling across that in about 2018. And I was like, yeah, this is exactly what I've been thinking and living by all these years. Thank you, somebody, for validating it. And they're doing all this great work around heart coherence and getting into our hearts and like leading more heart-based and putting really good language to it. And I'm really appreciative of those who are taking heart-based work and grounding it in a way that makes it feel more approachable and measurable. because sometimes our mind can be skeptical and we have a hard time buying into something that we can't ground into some sort of vocabulary or terminology. And that's one of the gaps between spirit and science right now, I think, is that often in spirituality, we have these experiences and we feel like they're true, but they're really experience based. And so faith and our experience of the divine and the mysteries. And if somebody says, I've said it, I've had communication with angelic beings. Well, how do I prove that to you? How can you measure that? Maybe we could hook me up to a brain scan in those moments and somebody would say, well, her brain's doing this. And maybe somehow this shows that something's happening in my neural activity. But so much of our experiences can't be broken down and proven like that. And so it makes it really hard sometimes for us to take a spiritual experience that when you're the one going through it, it's life-changing, it's profoundly altering, and there's truth there. And then you turn around and try and tell it to somebody, and you don't have the language for it. It feels really one-dimensional, right? In experience, it's not even just three-dimensional. It's like living inside of the story and you're the main character. And it loses something. So sometimes things get lost in translation when we're trying to translate spirit into language and into ways that our brains can grasp. But our heart knows that the truth is there. And when I think about people who are like, prove it to me, I'm so glad that there's research and there's things being done out there. But all I can think is, try and tell somebody who's just lost a loved one and they're going through grief that their mind is stronger than their heart in that moment. Yeah, you can't think your way through grief. You can't logically say, it's been 3 months. I shouldn't be feeling this way anymore. My heartbreak should be gone. They're gone. They've moved on to a better place. So my mind is going to rationally tell my heart, stop feeling these things that you're feeling. All we need to do to know that there's truth and heart wisdom, and what our heart is trying to let us know, is to think about an experience that we've had where we've suffered some kind of heartbreak or maybe even falling in love. And you tell me that the mind is stronger than that. Tell that to a grieving person. Our heart has a wisdom and an intelligence all of its own. And when I opened up all this information today on like, what does our heart want us to know? It's like, make a case for me, let's make a case for the heart here about why this is so important, because our heart has this incredible, profound intelligence to it. And we're not really taught how to listen to it. So we are really missing out on a very vital part of information in our own somatic system, our own body. And our heart holds the ability to inform our mind and really help us take action and have thoughts that line up with our own sense of alignment, our own sense of spirit, our own sense of soul calling and purpose. And so if we're not accessing that, and we're just staying in the mind, and somehow we think that our thoughts are who we are, or we're spinning on something, and we are not figuring out a way to say, well, how does my heart feel about this? What does my heart want me to know? Like, we are missing out on, it's like the earth, it's like 3/4 water, like 3/4 of our intelligence. I made that number up, 3/4. I don't know what it is, but it's like cutting off. If we were to do a pie chart on here's all these ways intelligence and information presents itself to us, and we didn't include the heart, you're missing probably the biggest slice of pie on that chart. And that brings me to my next point of what I want to talk about with the heart. And that is, our heart is a portal. It is a doorway and a gateway that has the ability to help us move into our intuitive self. Our heart helps us move into our inner world. I use the term portal a lot, and portal can mean many things, where a portal is just something that you step through and it transports you to a different world. And so the heart can be a portal to our inner world. It can be a portal to our relationship with spirit and our experiences with spirit. It can be a portal to connecting with a loved one after loss. if we can really get in our heart and get in our love for them, that's often when we can feel the presence of a loved one, or at least put out there, I really miss you. Could I have a sign that you're close by? And usually within 24 hours, if not sooner, some sort of sign shows up. We see a cardinal sitting on the fence right outside the window, not that long after we prayed that. I find pennies a lot. I've got a whole story around my brother Brent and Brent pennies. I've written about this in a couple of my books. So I'll find pennies a lot when I'm like, bro, I need to know that you're still around. Like, I'm drowning down here. I need a little bit of like spirit love from the big brother. I will find pennies a lot, but that's all come through the heart. So our heart is this portal to a lot of different information. And when we can get into our heart, we can access that information. And when we can, the way that I think about this is like, if the heart is at the center of the wheel, the spoke of the wheel, there's all these different shoots of it, right? And so we can use our heart to try and move into these different understandings and these different awarenesses. When I open the Akashic Records are kept at the frequency of unconditional love. You can't really think your way into the records, even though you use the intention of the mind and words to say a prayer to set your intention to go into the records. When I was learning to work with the Akashic Records and I was self-taught, the stories back in Understanding the Light of the Akashic Records, if you haven't tuned into that episode, but I was self-taught just based on observation and getting readings. And then I learned how to do it on my own. I went in through the heart. And even today, before I hopped on to make this audio, I have a little ritual that I do where I call in some angels and I call in some energy. And I say, open our hearts to the information that wants to come through. But a lot of my channeling, it comes through the heart. Like, it literally feels to me like my heart's kind of a little bit of a walkie-talkie, tuning into different energies. And sometimes it will receive a message and I will feel this vibration that it often for me happens like in my high heart chakra at my back. My heart might feel like it's glowing. It might feel like it's vibrating. It might feel like it's resonating. It might feel like it's humming or singing music. I will get a sensation in my heart. And a lot of times I'll hear a thread of a word in my head. And that's usually when I go sit down in front of my computer or I go grab a pen and paper if I have time, because that's how I will bring a message through, is I have to write it out or type it out. If I'm speaking with somebody and giving a reading, then I will speak it out. But if it is just for me coming through and I'm not reading for anybody, I write it out. But it's all coming through the heart. So when people have asked me before, are you psychic? Sure. I mean, if that word means, do I pick up on, sort of this phenomenon that I'm perceiving through my senses and perceiving psychic information on an energetic way? Okay, why not? But, a better way that I think about myself is really more of like a heart-based transmissions, that my work is really heart-based. And so much of what I feel is through my heart. So our heart is a portal. I did not grow up with the gift of talking to the angels. I do not have a story where I was a psychic I was since I was a kid or something like that. I was an empath. That story I can tell you, but I didn't have some of the gifts that other people in my field who might have intuitive gifts had. And they say, oh, it was always with me and I was scared of it and I shut it down and I disowned that part of myself. And like, that's not my story. My story is going through a spiritual awakening, learning to work with my heart, learning to open my heart, learning how to use the intelligence of my heart and value that more than the thoughts in my mind. And through that process and following my heart and literally following what lights me up and what calls to me, my gifts grew through that. So everything that I know to share in this podcast and to teach you that's come through my direct experience base, it's been heart-based, which is one of the reasons I teach about your heart magic. And everything that I mentioned when I said the heart is a portal to our intuition, to our inner world, to our loved ones, to spirit, all of those things held lessons for me there that helped grow who I am, not just as a person, but they grew my heart and grew my spiritual gifts. Even grief. And we are going to talk about a little bit later what happens if your heart's really closed right now because you're in grief. I've got you covered today. So if you are that right now and you're listening to this, there is zero pressure on you right now. We're just all holding space for you. Whoever's going through that, you do not force your heart to be somewhere that it's not. It'll come in time. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can work with that aspect of yourself if you're in a closed state because you're in grief or heartbreak. So moving on, how does our heart speak to us? I love this topic because the heart is so creative. So the heart doesn't necessarily speak through rational thought and logic where it strings this all together. The heart speaks through images and it speaks through resonance and energy. It speaks through music and colors. It speaks through very simple messages that we might be getting over and over. Like we might hear a phrase. Sometimes when I said earlier, that poem that just touches me so much about staying patient with what's unsolved in your heart and just staying with the questions because we find the answers through living. That quote spoke to my heart. That's not a rational quote. That was written by a poet. Poets usually write from the heart. They're tapping into our emotional center. And it spoke to something in me because at the time in 2011, when those words were so meaningful to me, I was really had a lot of mysteries in my heart and I didn't know where it was going to go. So it spoke to me on a heart level. So our art and beauty and creativity and music and all of those things are ways that the heart speaks. The heart can speak through nature. The best way that I have to describe this, because I feel like I'm trying to take something that's experiential and like ground it into terminology to give us all an idea, like here's how your heart magic and wisdom might show up. There is a huge experiential component of this. And I'm going to draw a parallel between how hearts like give us information and what happens in the Akashic Records. So my understanding of the Akashic Records is that when I tell people what are they, we talk about them like a library a lot. You know, it's a great metaphor. This is a symbol for what the records are, that it's like this great energetic database, or it's a library that you can go into, you pull a book on a topic off the shelf, and you can see what's been written in that book through your intention and will and open heart and having the right intention. Or it's like a big computer, you know, and so we're going to do a Google search on a little Akashic search on understanding how your heart speaks. And I access that information. But my true understanding of the Akashic Records is that the information is really coded in more of an experiential way. And it's the difference between opening a book and reading a book I live on the island of Kauai. I can sit here in this podcast and I can tell you what it's like to live on the island of Kauai. If you've traveled over here on vacation, you have a sense of maybe what life on Kauai is like. But you actually have to live here to truly understand the paradoxes of life living on an island. And I've been here 6 years now. There are some things I still don't know. I haven't been here long enough. And so I will not pretend to be an expert, especially on a land that is so strongly tied to Native Hawaiians. I want to be really mindful that I don't overstep here. But in my own experience, you actually have to live here, and you have to live here for longer than like, oh, I went there and stayed on the island for 2 months and I went through this intense healing and oh my gosh, I love Hawaii so much. Kauai is just in my heart. Like you have to know what it's like to sit in traffic to get to Costco in Lahui from the North Shore and how it becomes this like 4-hour round trip and like going to Costco to get groceries and stuff like that. Like it's a thing. Like you have to know what it's like to live here in this very normal way. And so what if instead of me sitting here and telling you, here's exactly what it's like and spending an hour telling you a story about life on Kauai, what if I could take all of that and create an experience, something intangible. And like, let's just say I put the energy of my experience on Kauai into something intangible that you can't see. Let's pretend it's like an energy bomb, a little light ball that I'm going to throw at you. And you say to me, what's it like to live on Kauai? What has your personal experience been? And instead of telling you, I just take this little energy ball. And in that energy ball, I've encoded my experience, how I felt, thoughts that I've had living here, the things I love about it, the things I don't love about it, what it's like to wake up and be able to go down to the ocean, what it's like to see some of the infrastructure challenges that we have here, what it's been like to try and move my voice in a global way from like the smallest island, at least that's well populated, over here on the islands. What if I just put all of that and I just handed you this ball of energy and you were able just to like take it into your heart? And in that moment, you just felt it all. You knew exactly what it was like to be me living on this island for 6 years. You felt every up and down, every beautiful thing, everything that's made me cry, everything that's made me like pump my fist for joy, every moment in between, every moment of mundane life where it's like still life. Like it might be an exotic island, but it doesn't stop real life from happening. And you just kind of knew in that moment exactly what it was like to have my experience living on the island. And it's not your experience. So you don't really keep that. You keep the residual of it. You keep the impression of it. If you want specific information on one of those things, you say specifically, oh, that's kind of interesting to me. I'd like to know more about this point in time for BethAnne and what she experienced then. And so you ask that question and that experience becomes amplified. That's the Akashic Records. That's the best way I can truly describe them to you. It's like being in the experience and being able to amplify parts of those experience. And that is how our heart speaks to us. It's experience based. And it's why when our heart tells us something, it's so powerful, because in that moment, we are feeling it in this like multidimensional 5, 6, 7, 8, 90. I don't know. I know there's also supposed to be all these different dimensions. I can't pretend I understand what they all mean. We'll say this 5D reality. It's immersive. And you just know something. And so if you've ever made a heart-based choice and you knew that this relationship was no longer for you, or you couldn't do this job another second, or you were being told in your heart to go do this thing, or you did something and it shocked you. It's sort of out of character, but your heart moved you to do it. It's because in that moment, you had this multidimensional, multifaceted intelligence informing you and telling you this here in this point in time is your truth. And if we're really dialed in, we almost have no choice but to follow it. Like if we resist it, it actually makes it so hard on us. And then our heart is kind of like, if you've ever seen the movie Ghost, where Sam is trying to get Whoopi Goldberg's character to let him know that he is alive, and that he wants her to give a message to Molly. And she's like, I don't want to listen. And so he just sits there singing like, Sam or Henry the Eighth, I am, second verse, same as the first, like over and over and over again. That's like kind of our heart when we're not getting it. Like, okay, you didn't get me the first time. Second verse, same as the first. You chose to ignore me again. All right. Third verse, same as the first. It's like this thing on repeat, and the signs and the messages and all of that will keep showing up in our life over and over again. And it will feel so strong that we won't be like, is this a sign from spirit and I'm missing it? We will know the right thing to do. There has been things in my life where in my heart, I knew the right thing to do, and I wasn't ready quite yet to do that right thing. And so I kind of like blocked that. And it's not like my heart was ever like, that's cool, BethAnne, going ahead and block me. Like it just kept letting me know. And finally I moved around to a place of being like, I don't think I want to ignore this any longer, because I'm kind of afraid of what's going to happen if I don't pay attention to it. Our heart's not shaming. Our heart is not mean. Our heart's not cruel. So if you heard me say that and you had this, oh no, I have this thing, and you reacted in fear, that's probably not your heart. It's more like our heart is this wise guide. And if we choose to ignore it, it's not going to cruelly tell it to us again. It's more like fairy godmother or Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio, where it's just going to be like, all right, if you don't want to listen, I'm just going to keep telling you. And I'm probably going to say it a little bit stronger, but learn the lesson if you need to. and learn the lesson again if you need to. And if you need it a third time, learn it again. Like there's not a cruelty there. Even if our heart tells us a hard truth, like years ago when I it had this when I went through my divorce and I could feel in my heart, like, you can't stay here. And I had a vision at the time, a clear vision of what would happen if I stayed in that relationship, not just to me, but to them, that we would both kind of be like plants or something in a garden, not meant to keep growing together. And instead of blossoming into our full abundance, we would choke each other out, and neither one bloom into our fullest fruition. My heart didn't cruelly tell me that. And even though it meant I had very hard choices to make and I walked a very hard road, I've mentioned that story on here before. I don't know that I've actually ever told it in full. I had a friend mention it to me the other day where she really didn't know how bad my divorce was and what happened. And I realized I don't think I've ever really told it other than glossing over it. So perhaps for another time. But what I can tell you at the time is I was very listening to like the wisdom in my heart, and it was hard wisdom. Like I did not like that wisdom coming through, and I felt absolutely compelled to follow it. And there was no cruelty in it. There was love there, and there was kindness there, and there was a gentleness there. And so our heart's not cruel. So if it makes you fearful, it's not coming from your heart. That's just the mind. And that's our old programming. The heart is loving. So even if it's hard, there's still a softness or a wisdom or a compassion to it. Moving on. Let's see. This actually segues really nicely into what my next talking point was going to be. There's always a compassion to the heart, and it knows how to take any experience and use it for our highest growth. So I am loving this bit of wisdom. It's a little bit new to me. This comes from the Akashic Records. And when I opened the Akashic Records on this topic yesterday, I'm used to seeing an image when I open a topic. It's how I know I'm anchored into the record itself and I'm anchored into the experience. I'll receive some sort of an image that kind of metaphorically or symbolically represents the topic. And this is a new one for me that I'd never quite seen like this before. What I saw was like a big palette or screen or almost like a cosmic painting going on. It wasn't as one-dimensional as an artist at a palette. I saw it more against the starry sky. And I saw all these colors, and these colors were swirling and they were creating new pictures every day. And they were blending with each other and they were alchemizing to create new colors. And when a color came in that might not be the most cheerful color, I love color. I usually don't wear the color dark gray. Doesn't look that great on me. And for me, gray feels a little bit too somber. There's nothing wrong with gray. If you love gray, it's also a beautiful color, and it's the color of pewter and silver and clouds and the rain that's going on outside right now. It's actually a great color. It's just not so much in my palette. I kind of tend to dress a little bit like a rainbow. So gray for me might represent having a gray mood. And I saw like the gray being taken and just beautifully being woven into this gorgeous rainbow of all these colors. And that gray kind of taking on a shimmer and an essence to it. And what was coming through in the records at that time is that our heart has the ability to alchemize any experience, any feeling state, anything that feels ugly, anything that we judge about ourselves and our life, and it will take it and it will make something beautiful about it if we trust the process. And so often what happens is we block our own hearts because we don't let our feelings flow. I did this recently. I was really mad about something, and a friend called me on it and was like, I feel like you're lying right now. Like you're saying it's fine and it's not. Like I can feel it in your throat chakra. It's closing up. And oh my God, she was so right. Like I didn't even want to admit it. And I like had to do like little BethAnne work and go back to my journal and kind of do this. I'm really angry. And if it's helpful to you and you're really mad and you want to do something constructive with it, you can write about it. You can paint it out. You can take crayons and you can make the colors of what mad looks like to you. For me, I drew a big old circle and I just wrote out like the messy feelings inside of it just to get a layer of it off. It helps so much with processing it. And I was blocking my own process because I wasn't listening to this part of me that felt angry. And I was blocking my heart through blocking my anger. We don't have to be destructive with the tough feeling state. We can work with them constructively. And the minute I did that, I felt like this flow come through in my heart. And I felt this sense of my heart wants to do something constructive or transformative with that anger. It's not going to let it sit there in this sad, angry lump and be this thing that kind of blocks my BethAnne heart magic. It's going to take it into that giant little cosmic palette of artistry, and it's going to start weaving it up. And all I had to do was surrender to my heart and feel the feeling and create space for it. And I work with my heart where I will say, I do not know what to do with this, but I trust you to work on healing it. So I'm just going to send the energy of love to this part of myself. I'm going to let my heart take over here, and I'm going to let my heart draw into me through its electromagnetic field, through its magnetism, all forms of support and energy and inspiration and ideas and spiritual insight that I need to process that in a way that truly serves my journey and my highest good. So your heart wants you to know nothing's too big for it. And remember, your heart is the portal that connects you to spirit. When we talk about like the light of spirit, the light of the mysteries, the light that of the divine that's inside of us, like we access that through the heart. So a nice way to think about it is your heart's your divine hookup. So another way of saying nothing is too big for your heart is actually like nothing's too big for spirit. Spirit's neutral. Spirit doesn't judge our feelings. Spirit doesn't say you're being punished because you're really mad today. Spirit actually wants us to like flow and talk and like be open and like engage in our spiritual connection and just say, here's where I'm at. And I feel like that work for me starts with just being in my heart and letting my heart feel where it's at. So nothing's too big for your heart, and your heart has the ability to alchemize and transform all of these things. And I talk about colors a lot. And if you're not using creativity or some sort of color to work with your heart, you might consider that, because colors are something where I think the heart really like vibrates and resonates with those frequencies and those vibrations. And so they're a really powerful way to work with like the colors of our heart and to work with that information in a way that's not so logical. And I really love how all this is flowing together today, because this actually brings me into my next point. And that is, how do we move from our head to our heart? Like, how do we like get from that really logical place and get to that experience place where our truth is found, where our living water is found, our connection to just all that is, it's found in the heart. It's not in the head. So how do we get there? I think that there's no right answer to this. We get to be really creative. But what I can say is that you can't really think your way into your heart. If you're trying to rationalize your way into your heart, it's kind of like it makes me think about some of the passages from different religious backgrounds, different scriptures, but a lot of times they talk about kind of like entering heaven, and how I'm thinking about this passage that I think is more from like the Judeo-Christian faith. I believe Christianity, but it kind of talks about like getting through the heaven is like squeezing through the eye of a needle. And our connection to all of those things, our connection to the divine, our connection to creating some form of divine on this planet, it's through the heart. Like if you want to think of us as the hands of God, if you don't like that term, the hands of spirit, the hands of love, the hands of life, whatever represents that to you, it's us. It's us, and it's our light. And so the way that we connect and bridge the divine into the tangible, it's through the heart. So you can't think your way into it. That's why it's so hard, and why I feel, this is just my personal opinion, but I feel that's what a lot of those proverbs where they talk about it's hard to gain entrance, like that's what I feel they mean. Not like it's so hard because you have to be perfect or do all this stuff or do this certain thing. I think it was just spirit knowing it's that hard to move from the rational mind into your heart. you can't think your way into it. You have to feel, you have to listen to music. Music moves us. That's why so many of us love it. Even people who might not be heart-based might be people who are music lovers. That's their way into their heart. We have to color it. We have to be creative. We have to do something like draw a map of your heart. How fun does that sound? Sit down in your journal and map out your heart, map out your inner world. We get creative. Our creativity is when we're in more the creative brain and the nonlinear brain. And for people who are already creative, this may or may not come easier, but if you're really creative and you've done art for a long time and you've kind of got a system to it, the way into the heart is not like a system. It's kind of messy. Like take out some finger paints and finger paint for a while. And years ago, I remember getting Akashic readings from the woman who, used to do mine. And I remember something that came up in a reading once, and it was like that I should finger paint or I should play more. And it was like, don't make this like a should, don't make this like because, your spirit knew me really well. And they knew that if you tell BethAnne, you need to do this, that I would be like, BethAnne needs to play. And I'll put it down on my list and I'll carve out an hour where I think I have to go play. Kind of is paradoxical to like what the concept of play is. So at the time it was like, let it be messy. Like, don't overthink this. It can be 2 to 5 minutes. Draw like a heart with a stick in the snow. I used to love to do that. Paint a rock, do finger painting, let it be messy. And that's because the heart's process is a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more messy. It's helping us move into a part of our brain that's not always trying to organize everything, but can just be in the flow of experience. So that's the kind of stuff that we want to think about when we talk about moving from our head into our heart. Having said that, the other thing that we need to do, actually, there's a lot of things. These are just, when I say this, these are just the talking points I wrote down for today. But the next thing is we need to build a relationship with our heart. So if you already have a relationship with your heart, awesome, head of the curve. But if you are saying, well, I really want to move from my head to my heart and I want to get to know this part of me more, think about it in terms of a relationship. That you are in a relationship with all the things that make up who you are. You're in a relationship with your intellect. You're in a relationship with your physicality and your body. You're in a relationship with your heart and your heart's intelligence. And you're in a relationship with the world around you. The collective, the people in your life. You're in a relationship with Mother Earth. You're living on her. So whether or not you know it, you're automatically in a relationship with her. So you're in a relationship with your heart. And we have to be intentional about investing in that relationship. So if somebody says to somebody who never thinks about what their heart says, well, what does your heart tell you? And they're like, I don't know. That's not very shocking to me. I mean, they might know the heart's pretty strong. So if we actually just listen to it, sometimes even if you're not used to that, you might already innately have a sense. But if you're really trying to discern and develop nuance, then we have to invest in the relationship. We don't just get to automatically have a great relationship with our heart because it's in us. Like we actually have to learn the language of it. We have to learn to tune in. And this doesn't need to feel like work. It's more like, yay, I get to spend more time with my heart because I spend a lot of time learning, studying, doing, being productive. I mean, literally just take a moment and reflect on how you spent your time growing your personhood in your lifetime. And most of us spend a lot of time in our mind. We go to school, we learn stuff, we spit it back out and regurgitate it and take these tests and show that we memorized it, or maybe we've learned it comprehensively and we can create an essay that we've done our research. I mean, all of that's like so much in the mind. So our heart, we just have to spend time with it. And that's where self-love and being in relationship with ourselves and creating space for our heart really comes through. And that's why we do things like journal or go sit in nature or color or just ask our heart. I do a lot, the very simple guided meditation of putting your hand on your heart. I do this in my client work a lot, asking people, what color is your heart today? And like just listening to the heart, or what image does your heart give you? Sometimes if I do guided meditations for a group, we'll do the hand on the heart, and I might do use imagination while we're connecting with our heart to say, animal guide shows up today? What does your heart want you to know that you're meant to connect with? Just listen to your imagination and let that guide you, and know that that's your heart using your imagination to inform you. There's all these ways that we get into it, but we have to spend time and be in relationship with it. And then another great way to build our relationship with our heart is do the things that light us up. Like if it makes your heart happy and makes you feel like glowy inside or excited or kind of passionate, or something about it is enticing to you or fun or joyful to you, then that's probably the stuff that's going to help you just get connected to your heart chakra and get connected to your heart. And this kind of weaves back to this idea of being told to like finger paint, let it be messy, go play, but not to overthink it. Like when we're being playful, we tend to be in our heart. Like if we can override our like very serious adult brain that sometimes will be like, why are you doing this? You're not being productive. You're wasting time. And we can actually just like be in the moment. Our heart kind of takes over, and our heart innately is really curious and is drawn to joy and play. So a lot of times like that right there helps us be able to get into those heart-based energies. And if you're somebody who likes that stuff and you like it with a twist, like some people who they are meant to be in this word, their authentic self is a little bit of a rebel. Like instead of a rainbow, they'd rather wear black. They'd rather, like I said, gray's not my color. And they're like, gray is my favorite color, BethAnne. Like I love gray, and I love being a little bit of a like contrarian in society. And I'm drawn to things that are a little bit subversive or something that is just a little bit out there. Like, do your heart. This is not like Dr. BethAnne's heart magic and telling you what my heart magic is, and you have to be like this. This is your heart magic. And if your heart magic is drawn to something that is different than other people, like, then it will serve you well to be your authentic self and learn about you and learn why you're drawn to that, and allow yourself the curiosity to explore it and see like what happens when you move towards what lights your heart up. There's not one way to do this. Do it in your own way. Make your own alchemy of it. Put your own twist on it. All right. I promised that I would talk about what do we do if our heart is closed or heartbroken. And so I want to reserve a little bit of time before we wrap up today to address that. When we go through grief, it's interesting because in some ways, our heart is almost never more open than when we're grieving, and yet it feels really wounded and can feel really closed. A lot of times our heart's not open to joy if we're going through profound grief. Not that we can't feel joy. Sometimes laughter or having like a break is what we need, and our heart can receive that. But a lot of times, like it's just not there, and we might feel really shut down. Like I have often said when I lost Brent, I use the analogy that I felt like half of me was frozen, or like a lung had been ripped out, like some part of me was missing, and some part of me just felt like shut down and frozen inside. Like I was a frozen lake in Alaska in the winter in -15 temperature. And somewhere under that lake, I knew the water was still there. I knew eventually it would thaw and it would be summertime and ducks would swim on the lake and people would stop ice skating on me and instead like just enjoy my beautiful lakeness. I knew that the water would flow again, but I mean, I just felt really shut down. I would not say that was a time in my life that my heart was like open to many things. It was open to grief, and it was open to death, and it was open to learning these really hard lessons, very House 12 stuff on astrology, if you're at all into what the houses mean, sort of the mysteries, what's behind the veil. And I really needed to understand what death was and what it was to like physically lose my brother in order to finally re-engage in life again. So when we're in that place, how do we choose the light? How do we stay in our heart? Well, you're already in your heart because grief is such an intuitive process. Like you're already in your heart. So make space for it. Whether you write, draw, watch. I needed to watch all these sad movies. I remember watching like Titanic and natural disaster movies and movies where people died and being like, yes, Yeah, but it's like my heart needed that. Like I'm listening to Celine Dion sing, my heart will go on and on. Like I needed all of that. That might not be your process. I needed it. I made like a sad song list and I wasn't trying to revel in it. I was just trying to receive it. And I remember doing things like taking a hot bath on a cold winter's night. I was still in Alaska at the time. And just kind of picturing like my heart was being like poured into by spirit. I pictured like beautiful starry energy just being poured into me, because I needed to receive. Like my heart wasn't really open to giving and like doing a lot, but it was open to receiving healing. So set the intention. I open to receive healing in whatever way my heart knows is best for me. Very simple. Do that. And if you feel like you need to qualify it, say, and just to warn you, I'm very tender right now. So please make the healing gentle. Help it be soothing. Help it feel like aloe to my heart. I don't think I can handle more than that. Be clear about your intention with what you need and just open to this idea of receptivity. Something else you can do is just go be in nature or be close to nature. Because nature intuitively and innately opens our heart. When we're in nature, we begin to sync with that energy, sync with nature's resonance, nature's lessons. So we don't have to work to try and open ourselves up. We can just like receive from nature. That's a beautiful way to work with heart energy and to just let yourself be exactly where you're at and trust nature to do the work for you. And then the other thing that I want to say, and I kind of touched on this already, is if you truly feel ready and say, I'm ready to heal my heart and open it up again, ask for it. Ask for it. If you say, my heart's been closed long enough, I'm ready to heal and I want to open back up again. I don't feel open right now. Just ask for it. Pray to or set the intention to whatever your understanding is of the mysteries. I did this years ago and I actually used a pink, I think calcite crystal. I think pink calcite is what it's called. And I think I'd read somewhere it was a heart healing crystal. And I put it under my pillow and it came into my attention about 6 months after my divorce that I was like actually like really in deep grief. It's almost like I'd been through the worst of it and the divorce had passed and my life was finally looked like it was going to get good again. And then the grief hit even worse. And it's like psychologically my defenses were down and I didn't have to be in survival change mode. And so it's like my grief was like, hey, all this unprocessed stuff, I'm here now. It's time to process me. So it was really unexpected. And I felt really numb inside. And so I put this pink crystal under my pillow and I just said this very sincere prayer at the time. I didn't even know what I believed anymore. And I was like, well, whoever or whatever's out there, I want a sense of connection again. I want my heart to open back up and I ask for healing. That is a whole other story, what happened next. But I got my healing and I got a profound spiritual experience that came in through all of that over the next few weeks. It worked. So just put the intention out there. And I'll just set the intention today that if you're in that space, that this podcast feels like medicine for the heart for you. And you already received, you were open to listening and you stayed with me to the end. So you had your medicine. Do nothing. Be well and take good care of yourself and know that your heart is also self-healing and it will help you open back up in time. You do not need to know what your grief is meant, or you don't need to know what to do with your grief. You don't need to know how it's meant to transform you. You don't need any of that stuff. Trust your heart to alchemize it and to help see you through that process. All right. With that, we are concluding today's episode of Your Heart Magic. Next week, our topic is Akashic Wildcard. So I am going to do a wildcard week where I will be opening the Akashic Records up on a topic of my choice. In the future, I'm really thinking about having listeners send an email and say, these are things I might be interested in. But for now, I'm just going to see what presents itself to me this week. Though if you're listening to this and you would like to do that, please feel free. I've got a contact form, I believe, a link to it in the resource section and in my bio, like underneath the podcast. And you're welcome to say hello or to say, here's a topic I would be interested in knowing more about. I can't guarantee that I will do it, but I'm always open to feedback and to trying to weave it in somehow to the podcast when I can, as I feel led to do. So stay tuned, but I will be opening the Akashic Records on some form of a topic that is relevant to our life today. And we'll see what comes through with that. And until then, have a fabulous, beautiful week and be well, be love, be you, and be magic.
You've been listening to Your Heart Magic with Dr. BethAnne Kapansky-Wright. Tune in next week for a new episode to support and empower your light.